So we start in the Torrey Honors Institute reading Homer, partly because he's really, really old and really, really dead. And we read his Iliad and his Odyssey, two fantastic epic poems, very different poems. One of them is right in the middle of the great battles of the Trojan War. Another one is more focused on one man and the long wending path he takes to get home after the war in Ithaca. But Greg, as you were pointing out, it's a great place to start because Homer gives us such a rich picture of what it means to be human in all of its rich forms. Can you talk a little bit about what it means to be human in Homer? What do we learn about humanity?
Yeah. In some ways, you would think that because he's setting up the story within the framework of the Olympic pantheon, and the humans are interacting with the gods that we don't recognize, you'd think that's going to lead to an understanding of human nature that's very different from anything that we can learn from. At the same time, particularly in the Iliad, I think Homer is very sensitive to and observes very well the nature of mortality and what it is to be someone who is marked, whose life is marked by death. Achilles, so the opening line of the Iliad starts out, singing goddess of Achilles, the rage of Achilles, Peleus' son. And Achilles is someone who's deeply motivated by this sort of overwhelming rage. Underlying that is a deep desire for immortality. His mother has told him that if he fights, he will gain everlasting glory. And he's motivated by this. But as the story unfolds, it's his sort of lust for mortality to be something more than he is that separates him from his community, that makes him insensitive to the suffering of those around him, removes him from the fight that his people are engaged in. But it's this, I think it's this lust for mortality, immortality, and a desire to be something more than he is that makes him insensitive to community, and is a fundamental misunderstanding of what it is to be a human that is marked, whose life is marked by death in profound ways.
That opening line too, though, because it talks about rage, seems to point so directly, though, to humanity. Not that the gods in Homer aren't full of anger or rage even at times, but it seems like the opening line points us towards his mortality, almost setting up this epic war, which of course it is about a war, but this internal warfare about him overcoming something like his rage, or at least trying to channel it for immortality's sake, but yet still such a basic human impediment, to be angry about something and to have that constantly be the thing that you're both trying to overcome, but channel to somehow be the immortal person that you want to be.
That's nice. So on the one hand, there's limitation to humanity. To be human is to be limited. On the other hand, there are options for humanity. So there's this rage within me, and part of the invitation in being human is this invitation to, in one sense, to be more than I am. And so Achilles has this opportunity to overcome his rage, and in that sense to transcend his limitations, even, or at least his flaws. Now, what do you make of that? So on the one hand, we need to sort of stay in our lane, and humans need to know who they are. And on the other hand, there's this sort of basic human desire and opportunity for self-transcendence and for becoming more than we are, and I think appropriate ways. So there are inappropriate ways to do that. There also seem to be appropriate ways to do that.
Yeah, it seems like maybe that desire to be something more is almost also part of what it means to be human, that it seems native to us to almost want to transcend our mortality, the human mortality, to become immortal. And so in that sense, it might be that what it means to be human is to always live in that tension, to recognize our mortality, but to always want to strive to rise above it and to grasp immortality. And he's doing it in a particular way, but it might just be a very basic human desire.
It occurs to me too that he's doing it without knowing himself. The Delphic Oracle says, "Know thyself." That is the sort of core injunction in the ancient world. And so maybe that's part of what human human sort of ambition ought appropriately, it's got to be tied to self-knowledge in a way that he doesn't seem to have.
Yeah, I think for Achilles, his aspirations and his reaching for something more is the way that he goes about that is fundamentally warped by a misunderstanding of who he is as a human person. So there's a point when his old friend Phoenix says, even the gods can be pacified in their rage, but you've reached such a state of implacability. It's so excessive. It's even beyond what the gods do. So in that sense, what he aspires to, it becomes twisted and separates him from his community because he has a misunderstanding of what it means to be human and a misunderstanding of the fundamental limitations. So the tension that you mentioned between those things are limitations, but also striving to be more. If they're not rightly informing each other, then the aspirations become warped.
And I think you're right. Like, he doesn't know himself, but it seems like the other thing he's done that's fundamentally not consistent with what it means to be human is he's removed himself in many ways from meaningful interaction and, I mean, maybe for lack of a better word, community. He's isolated himself. He's become a little too myopic. And I think that's something that maybe is offered a bit of a correction to in the Odyssey, where what it means to be Ithacan, to be from Ithaca, factors into this journey home and the way in which Odysseus' family, as they wait for him, gives more of a sense of what it means to have a home, the hearth kind of mentality. And Achilles just seems to have removed himself from that, which seems detrimental to his good development as a human.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I love that too, that for Odysseus, he genuinely longs to be home, mostly. So it's a long trip home, in part because though he has this sort of deep desire for a homecoming, there are a lot of things along the way that hold out great desire, one of which is immortality. He's promised immortality in life with a goddess, and it catches his eye for quite a while, and he eventually chooses mortality for the sake of being home. But I love the fact that you don't just get an Odysseus who sort of glibly says, yeah, I want to go home and I accept the fact that I'm caught up with other people in community and this is an easy choice. But he shows how tempting these various offers of immortality are to us.
Yeah, but they're fundamentally unsatisfying. And so for Odysseus with Calypso, sort of a lot of pleasure, a lot of delight, but fundamentally it doesn't meet the longing of the human heart for home, for fidelity, for a place where he has a role to play.
Which again just also seems to highlight something that is typically human, is that being flawed or the way in which we're wired towards imperfection. So that our motives are always mixed motives, and even our ability to know ourselves, to come back to the Delphic oracles charge, is always fraught with misunderstanding and incorrect self-knowledge, which just leads into more and more conflicted decision making and maybe more and more anger.
I guess it's worth reading Homer after all.
Yeah.
The Torrey Honors Institute at Biola University. Biblically centered, great books, liberal education. More at biola.edu/Torrey.